Hello and welcome. Let's take a look at our top story. Polling stations across South Africa closed after a day of long queues as voters turned out in huge numbers for a watershed election, which is being called the most competitive since the end of apartheid. Now counting is underway in each polling station. Partial results are expected over the next 3 days, with final results likely on Sunday. So far, the counting has been completed in around 4,900 districts out of over 23,000. Now, according to the results from 21% of polling stations, the ANC has gathered around 43% of votes. The DA has 24.7%, the EFF has 8.9%, and the MK party is with 8%. Please note that these numbers are just early trends that are trickling in. Now, South Africa's Election Commission says the final voter turnout would be well beyond 66%, recorded in the last general election in 2019.
Voted for ANC, and I expect any changes.
I voted for the EFF, and that's because I need fresh minds.
I just want to be the first one who can keep ANC. I'm sick and tired.
It's my first time voting, yes, and I'm feeling very excited but nervous.
I have hope. That's what I can say.
South Africans queued long into the night in a watershed election. In some cities, voting continued long after the planned 9 p.m. shutdown. This was due to a number of reasons and a large number of voters arriving later in the evening hours, and the queues were snaking into the night. The Election Commission said there was a last-minute rush in urban voting, due to which the turnout is likely to be higher than what it was in 2019. But many voters did complain at the polling stations that the 3-ballot system was too complex. Though the results will not be known before the weekend, we could expect partial results to predict who could be in majority in the National Assembly. Partial results in the next couple of days will predict whether the ruling African National Congress has lost its overall parliamentary majority or not. Casting his ballot on Wednesday, President Ramaphosa said he had no doubt that the people of South Africa would back the ANC once again.
When South Africa decides on the future of our country, who should lead the government of South Africa, and I have no doubt whatsoever in my heart of hearts that the people will once again invest confidence in the African National Congress to continue to lead this country.
Let's take a look at the possible scenarios in South Africa's election outcome. Now, the first is if the African National Congress outperforms the predictions by a huge margin and gets above 50% of the votes. Opinion polls say, considering the mounting issues South Africa has been dealing with, this seems highly unlikely. But in this case, President Ramaphosa will comfortably get a second term. Now, scenario 2, if the African National Congress fails to cross the 50% mark, but manages to get close to the number, it could then shore up a majority by allying itself with some 4 dozen smaller parties and also regional parties contesting the election. Now, if President Cyril Ramaphosa's party gets close to 40%, as opinion polls predicted, this would be a first since Nelson Mandela's party came to power in 1994. It would force Ramaphosa to seek coalition partners if he is to be re-elected by Parliament to form a new government. The ANC could then patch up ties with one or both of the radical left parties led by former ANC figures, Firebrand Julius Malema's Economic Freedom Fighters, or former President Jacob Zuma's MK party.
It's a turning point. It's a point where our country will make a serious inroads and a country where the voter will decide at which direction we are going. For now, we are on a road to victory. We are in an election to remove the ANC, so we don't talk about opposition parties.
If the ANC ANC does drop below 50%, which party will be kingmaker? Depends on both how many extra seats it needs and which opposition parties it dislikes the least. Now, the fourth scenario, which is highly unlikely as per opinion polls, is if the Democratic Alliance, which pledged to rescue South Africa, gets 50% of the votes with a broader alliance of smaller parties, the multi-party charter. Now, the DA is calling Ramaphosa's possible alliance with Zuma or Malema a doomsday coalition.
Don't get to the 50% plus one mark. We will obviously look at the lie of the land. There may be parties that are elected into parliament that are outside of the charter that may want to then make a decision to work with us, and we would welcome that. But I don't believe that keeping the same bad people who've got us into the situation, that have pushed 42% of our country into the unemployment queue, that have led to 30 million people living in poverty.
Yesterday, while polling was underway, I spoke to the Democratic Alliance candidate for KwaZulu-Natal, Chris Pappas. He spoke to us about voter turnout and sentiment, about poll predictions, and how the Democratic Alliance sees its place in the provincial and general election. Here's that exclusive conversation.
I mean, you can see the queues here, you can see the people that have turned out. I know it's a little bit frustrating for people to wait in the lines, but this is what democracy is about. I mean, people spoke about 1994, that lines that snaked around the block, and this is what we're seeing today. And this is everywhere, which is really, really encouraging for our democracy. It gives credibility to the vote, it gives credibility to the outcome, and I'm excited. I'm excited for what the hope, I think, that people actually believe out there. Polls are only a snap in time, and there's those who are for and against them. But I think what it does do, it shows trends over time. And in KwaZulu-Natal, the trend has been upwards, which really excites me. You know, I think the story of this election in the province is going to be how well the Democratic Alliance does. You know, there's been a lot of talk around the MK and the ANC and the IFP. But when you go from 11% in a vote, and I think we'll get around 18, 19, 20%, that is an incredible growth for a political party like the DA in KwaZulu-Natal. So yeah, I'm confident that some of those polls are showing roughly where we will be. But at the end of the day, the only poll that counts is the one in the box. Well, here in KZN, there's going to be no party that gets 50%. So there is going to be some sort of coalition government here. What that looks like, the voters will determine that. But we will have to go into a coalition to form a government in this province. Our aim is to obviously be the biggest partner in that coalition, or the driver of that coalition, and that's what we've been doing consistently throughout the election. But people have got options. There's similar-minded parties, whether it's the ANC, EFF, MK sort of parties, or DA, IFP type parties who are already forging relationships in municipalities across the province.
For more on the South Africa elections and early trends, we have with us political commentator Ayanda Sishu-Excel, who is joining us live from Johannesburg. Hello to you, Ayanda. Thank you for being with us on First Post Africa.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, Ayanda, what are your views when looking at these early indications?
I think that it's too early to make strong predictions, but what we can see already is that the South African electorate has given the African National Congress not much of a mandate to go on. What we are seeing is numbers that have not happened actually since the advent of apartheid. You are correct to say that for the first time in a very long time, that the African National Congress is going to be polling below 50%. And for the first time in a really long time, I think that they are really running scared in the results center when they are looking at the figures that are coming out from the early predictions, because the IEC is right to say that for the first time in a really long time, the voter turnout will be over 66%. And we saw the long queues from the voting stations yesterday. And what that indicates is that people are really willing and are looking for change right now. And what the numbers that we are seeing is that change will really be coming after these 30 years of democracy.
Absolutely. What are the implications if the African National Congress loses its majority in Parliament for the first time?
I think that coalitions are definitely going to be the name of the game moving forward. If you look at the local elections from 2016 and in 2021, that really has been the way that our local governments have been governed, and our municipalities and our cities and towns have been governed through coalitions. And so it's going to be interesting to see how how coalitions are going to work moving forward because of the chaos that has come from our local governments as a result of that coalition. If you look at the voter turnout from 2021 in the local government elections, it was around 45%. And so that number in and of itself is also an indictment on political parties to say that the electorate here in South Africa has truly had enough of the empty promises that they've been getting. So now they're officially forcing these political organizations to work together in order to form governments, because clearly they cannot do it on their own.
Yeah, and considering the socio-economic context, including the high unemployment rates and the service delivery failures, do you think that this will influence the election results?
Absolutely. If we saw the lines at certain voting stations outside the university campuses in the Northwest, in Kimberley, Sol Plaatje University, in KZN, UKZN, the voting station that was nearest to Howard College actually closed after midnight. Here, the same thing as well with Wits University. We saw a high number of young people in this country turning out for the first time, which really we can actually see the change in tide when it comes to that. And a lot of analysts are actually saying that they need to actually change the way it is that they describe young people, because usually the notion is that young people are very, very apathetic. But as you can see, you mentioned the high levels of unemployment, the lack of access to higher education. And if I could just give you a couple of statistics as well. According to Stats SA, youth unemployment currently sits at 45.5%. That is high above the national average rate, which is 32.9%. We know that young Black women actually have a harder time being retained and entering into the labor system than men are. And so we know that here in South Africa, the number of women who have registered is higher than men. And so we are starting to see that many people are using their vote in order to change their circumstances and to change the socioeconomic circumstances that they are living in. And so the high cost of living, the lack of access to education, the lack of access to housing has started to affect a lot of young people. And now we are seeing that tide changing and people standing up and saying enough is enough and showing up to the polls and making sure that their voices are heard. So I do believe that the high cost of living, the lack of unemployment, and the fact that these issues are being scapegoated to the migrant population has also played a huge role in the number of voter turnout, because people are really tired of hearing the empty promises that they get from politicians, and they are now starting to realize that we can actually make a difference using our votes. This was the same thing that happened in 1994 after apartheid, when people realized that we can actually use our voice for the first time in order to vote in the African National Congress and usher in change. And so that's 30 years later, these young people are actually doing the same thing and making sure that they are voting in change. Now, what that change is going to look like, we still do not know yet, because it's still early predictions right now. But we can clearly see that there's been a mandate that has been given to political parties, and I say all political parties, not just the ruling party, to say that unfortunately now they're going to have to work together and form a government to make sure that the socioeconomic issues are solved for young people moving forward.
Absolutely. Ayanda, thank you very much for being with us on First Post Africa and for your valued insights and analysis.
Thank you very much for having me.
South Africa's May 29th elections.
There was a start of change in the country.
We are on the verge of history.
I am standing here at the forefront of change, where voices echo the call for action. The nation grapples with an unemployment crisis. As South Africans prepare to cast their votes, the question looms: will the winds of change usher in a new era, or will the legacy of the past maintain its grip on the future?